You're standing in your kitchen, staring at a stubborn plastic package. There's no knife in reach. You just want an edge, something sharp enough to cut through it, and you take almost anything at this point. Your hands start searching before your brain even finishes the thought. But the real answer to how your ancestors got their first edge is far stranger than someone picked up a sharp rock. You probably picture a caveman crouched by a fire, smashing two stones together until one splits into something useful. That image isn't wrong exactly. It's just about a million years too late, and it credits the wrong species entirely. In 2011, a geologist named Sonia Harman took a wrong turn in a dry gully in northern Kenya. She wasn't looking for anything that day. She stumbled on a scatter of broken stone that didn't look natural, and 4 years of careful dating later, her team confirmed something that rewrote the textbooks. The artifacts were 3.3 million years old. How much older is that than scientists expected? 700,000 years older than the tools anyone had previously called the first. Here's the part that reframes everything. Your genus, Homo, didn't exist yet. Whatever stood in that gully swinging one rock against another wasn't human. Its brain was roughly a third the size of yours. It probably still spent its nights in trees, and it left behind about 150 stone artifacts, some as small as your palm, others weighing close to 30 pounds. Too heavy and clumsy for most butchering work. Nobody is entirely sure what all of them were for. And it was already breaking stone on purpose, not randomly. Making an edge from stone takes something called conchoidal fracture, the same physics that shatters glass into curved shards instead of straight lines. You have to strike a rounded core stone at almost exactly the right angle, with almost exactly the right force, using a second stone as a hammer. Too soft, and nothing breaks off. Too steep, and the stone just crumbles into dust. Hit it right, and a thin, sharp flake pops free, sharper along its edge than a lot of steel blades fresh off a factory line. How do you teach that to a creature with no word for angle? You don't, or at least not with language. Decades before Harman's discovery, archaeologist Nicholas Toth tried something that sounds almost absurd. He tried to teach a bonobo named Kanzi how to knap stone, one careful demonstration at a time. Kanzi was sharp. Kanzi had learned hundreds of symbols and could follow spoken instructions well enough to surprise the researchers studying him. Toth showed him exactly how to hold the core, exactly where to strike it, over and over, for years. Kanzi never fully got it. He produced flakes eventually, but he couldn't reliably judge the angle the way a trained human can, even after all that repetition. At one point, he abandoned the technique altogether and started hurling rocks at the concrete floor instead, which actually worked. It cracked cores open just fine, but it's a shortcut no hominin toolmaker ever used, because it wastes most of the stone and gives you no control over the shape of what breaks off. Toth's conclusion was blunt. Whatever separates a hominin's hands and brain from an ape's isn't just raw intelligence. It's something more specific, wired for exactly this kind of task. There's a physical piece of this puzzle too, not just a mental one. Napping demands a precision grip, thumb and fingers meeting with real force and real control at the same time. Chimpanzees and bonobos have thumbs, but not the same leverage or the same fine control across the fingertips. Somewhere in the hominin lineage, hands were quietly being reshaped for exactly this job, generation after generation, long before anyone could have known what that reshaping was for. So what is it wired for? Neuroscientist Dietrich Stout spent years trying to answer that question, using a method that's unusual for an anthropologist. He put modern volunteers inside an MRI machine and had them learn to knap stone from scratch. It took some of them roughly 300 hours of practice just to get good. As their skill improved, one brain region lit up more and more on the scans, the inferior frontal gyrus. That's the same region that contains Broca's area, the part of your brain most responsible for producing language. Nobody can prove that's more than a coincidence yet, but it's the kind of finding that makes you wonder whether your ancestors' first sentences weren't spoken at all. They were struck, one flake at a time, each one a small, sharp record of a plan carried out correctly. Think about what that plan actually required. You have to hold an image of the finished flake in your head before it exists. You have to predict how the stone will fracture before you ever strike it. Then adjust, fail, and try again dozens of times without giving up. That's not muscle memory. That's forward planning. The same mental machinery you use right now when you picture how a sentence will end before you finish saying it, or picture where a ball will land before it leaves your hand. There's a reason that mattered so much. A sharp flake means access to something your ancestors couldn't get with teeth and hands alone. The meat and marrow locked inside a carcass, other predators had already given up on. More calories meant more fuel for a brain that was slowly, expensively getting larger. Some researchers think the hands doing the napping and the brain doing the planning shaped each other over time, each pushing the other slightly further, generation after generation. Not every scientist agrees on how old the very oldest tools really are. A paleoanthropologist named Tim White has questioned whether the Lomekwi sediments were dated correctly at all. That kind of disagreement isn't a flaw in the story. It's what real science looks like while it's still being figured out. You probably don't think of chopping vegetables or typing a message as ancient behavior. But every time your hand predicts an outcome before your eyes confirm it, a surgeon closing an incision without looking down at every stitch is running it. A goalkeeper diving before the ball is even halfway to the net is running it too. The task changed. The underlying trick, predicting your own body's next move and trusting it, didn't. Here's the twist that should sit with you a little longer than it's comfortable to. The technique barely changed for almost 1.5 million years after that gully in Kenya. A different small-brained hominin eventually refined it into what's called the Oldowan industry. Sharper and more consistent, but still just a hammerstone striking a core, the same basic move repeated with slightly more control. Those Oldowan tools are what a young Louis and Mary Leakey found in the 1930s at a site in Tanzania called Olduvai Gorge, alongside fossils of a species they would name Homo habilis, handyman, long assumed to be the very first toolmaker, until Harman's discovery at Lomekwi quietly took that title away from your own genus altogether. It took until roughly 1.76 million years ago for Homo erectus to push the design further, shaping the teardrop-shaped Acheulean handaxe, a tool that required holding a mental template of symmetry in mind across dozens of strikes on both faces of the stone. By the time those handaxes show up in the ground, they show up almost everywhere, across Africa, into the Middle East, across Europe and parts of Asia, carried by populations that had never met each other, arriving independently at strikingly similar shapes. Different hands, different continents, the same solved problem. You live in a world where a phone from last year already feels outdated. Your ancestors used the same basic technique, almost unchanged, for well over 1 million years. Progress for most of human history moved at a pace you would find genuinely unbearable. Maybe that's worth sitting with the next time a page takes too long to load, or an app update costs you 10 extra seconds you didn't want to give it. Somewhere back along your family tree, a creature with a brain a third the size of yours spent years, maybe a whole lifetime, perfecting a single strike and never once saw the technology change. It didn't have language, probably, or a name for the stone in its hand. It had a plan, a prediction, and the patience to keep trying until the fracture went exactly where it wanted. You still carry that. Every time you reach for an edge sharp enough to solve a small, immediate problem, you're using a piece of engineering that's 3 million years old, refined by hands that weren't fully human yet, and it started with something far stranger than a caveman finding a sharp rock.